Hi everyone, I am Akriti, and today we are all here to practice SQL questions. I have chosen a platform which is very new, but I find this very interactive and helpful, which is Data Linear by Nick Singh. And today we'll be focusing on SQL questions which are generally asked during interviews as a screening round, especially in the initial screening when there's a lot of applications for the companies. They don't go to individual applicants, even their resumes. They will most probably just run an ATS, which is an applicant tracking system, which will select the keywords and send you the link. These tests are hosted on platforms like these, maybe Hackerrank, Leetcode, and such questions, such short SQL questions are generally assessed by the computer itself. So the trick here is that maybe the solution looks good to you and it is with the perspective of the question as well. But sometimes there's one particular test case which is a boundary test case which you are not aware of. Maybe if you read the question thoroughly, there's some trick attached to it which is not getting satisfied. So getting practice on such platforms is very important, and that's why I've thought of making this a weekly thing. So we'll take it up each week, practice SQL questions together so it comes to our habit and we are able to do so quickly in the interviews. So just let me know if my audio is proper and understandable, and if you're properly able to see the stream or not, and we'll get started. Can anyone let me know in the chat, please? If okay. Thanks, Prithvi. Thanks, Siddharth. Thanks, Mino. Now we'll get started. So again, for the people who have joined just now, please look at the description of the video and you'll find certain links to the questions. So copy those links and paste it in whichever browser you're practicing, and please practice side by side. I don't want this to be a theory lecture. I want this to be a practice hands-on session. And so we'll go ahead. The first question is LinkedIn Power Creators. The link is again in the description. Upon reading, the question is from LinkedIn, a very renowned tech giant. So the LinkedIn creator team is looking for power creators who use their personal profile as a company or influencer page. Now with the rise of the influencer economy, I think there's not even a single person who wouldn't want to leverage this. So now what the question here asks for is, if the LinkedIn page of a particular person has more followers than the company they work for, we safely assume that the person is a power creator. We need to pick out power creator from certain profiles available in the database schema. The condition to be satisfied here is that they should be having more followers than their company's page, the company they work for. To explore the database schema, we have two tables here. The first one being personal profiles, which will have 4 columns: profile ID, name, followers, and employer ID. And the second would be company page. So there are two tables specifically for two different sets of customers which LinkedIn has, being the company and the individual people. The first thing when we look at the question is, we need to leverage both of the tables, that is the personal profiles and the company, because we need to compare between them whether the follower of the people in the personal profiles is greater than their significant company pages or not. So now we know that whenever we need two tables together in SQL, we would have to use a very important and very frequently used concept called joins. Joins can be of several types: inner joins, outer joins, left join, right join. But joins are specifically used to connect certain related table in an RDBMS, that is a relational database management system, based on a certain condition. So here the condition I assume would be that we will, in the personal profiles, there's a column named employer ID. The employer ID should match the company ID is what I am assuming. Let's see if that's the case or not. So we'll first start with select star. We select everything because no, we don't need to select everything. The question demands just for the profile ID. In the example I put, you'd be able to see that all the question requires from us is the profile ID. So we'll select the profile ID. From table, the next part, the from clause wants us to specify the table. In the table, we just don't need a single table, but two tables joined together. So we'll be using personal profiles and give it an alias to make it easier to access later. So I'll give it an alias P. And the next thing would be joining it to the company table. What this will do is it will generate a table, and each time where the employer ID would match the company ID, it will attach both of those rows from the table. So we'd be able to see in a single table what is the person, what is the follower count they have, what is their name, which company they work for, and what is the followers of those companies. So personal profiles P, then we'll use the keyword join and join it with the name of our second table, company pages. We'll again give company pages an alias as well. I am using C here. After we have specified which two tables we need to join, there's one more thing SQL requires, that is on what condition. So we'll say on. The condition here is that the employer ID column of the personal profiles table, which is accessed through the alias P, should be equal to, so the employer ID table from the personal profiles alias P should be equal to the company ID column of the company pages table, which is accessible through the alias C. So C dot company ID. Okay, now we have the table which will give us the profile ID of a person, their follower count, their name, all of their details, alongside the company they work for and the details of that company. After this, we have a very simple condition which was asked, that we want someone's LinkedIn page has more followers than the company they work for. And even after reading the question once or twice, I don't find any other boundary conditions. So I feel that's all for this question, where we'll go where. Now we want the followers from both of the tables. So for followers from the personal profiles table, we'll use the alias P. So P dot followers should be greater than the followers of the company, which is the followers column in the company pages table. So that will be accessed through the alias C dot followers. Let's run the code and see if it runs properly or not. So it says that my query output doesn't match with the solutions output. So what my output generates is 13547, and what the query output generates is 13457. The difference between both of these is how the profile ID is ordered. In order to achieve that, I will add a simple order by clause which takes the column name, and in case you want it to be ascending, which is the case here, we would leave it at the default parameters. In case I wanted it to be descending, I would have added a keyword DESC, which is descending. Here I wanted to order by the first column in my select clause, so I will say order by 1. Let's see if it works or not. It does. So this is my solution, and I hope this was clear and you're all able to implement it on your side. Let me know if you face any problem. If this is done on your side, please give me a confirmation so that we'll go to the question ahead. Clear. Thank you. There are some very active people in the chat box, and I just wanted you to know that I'm really grateful for you all. Let's move to the second question then. The second question would be the under 2 in the description. If you copy the link and paste it, you'll be navigated to this page, which is the highest grossing items. This is one of the very huge, well-known FANG companies, Amazon. Now, when we read the question, you'll see that we are given a table containing information of the Amazon customers and their spend on products belonging to various categories. What it wants from us is that find the top 2 highest grossing products within each category in the year 2022. What it wants as an output is the category, product, and the total spend. So the second I get this is, the first thing I would recommend doing is start with the output, which is a no-brainer because it has been specified, and also you can get an example of what it wants. So I'll say that I want the category. I also want the product and the total spend. Now how, where, when is what we need to decide now or come to a conclusion for. So upon looking at it, I think we only have one table here, so hopefully no joins, but there's always a self-join option, so let's hope we don't have to go there. Even if we have to, we can conquer that. We can conquer anything. To cringe, okay. We want each category, and under each category we want the top 2 highest grossing items. So let's start with how we should get, first of all, the total spend. In order to calculate whether the item is generating the highest revenue or not, we first need to know how much revenue is each item actually making up for the company. So we will start with a basic query where we'll sum I think it says spend. So in our input query, we have category, we have product, and we have the spend. In order to get the total spend from all of the customers, we'll be using an aggregate function sum, which is sum spend as total spend from our product spend. And now that we want it for each category and product, so we'll use the group by clause. and we will group it by category first, and since we want it to have a subcategory of product, because in the end we want it by each product within a category, so we'll further subcategorize it using the second column, which is product. When we run this code, the output we get is for each category and each product within that category, we are able to calculate the total spend. So that part of the question is done. Now what we want from it is, we don't want all of the categories and products. We want only a limited amount, that being the top 2 highest grossing ones. So now we'll have to find a way to rank these results in such a way that we only are ended up with 2 highest grossing items in each category. To do that, we'll be making use of a Windows function called rank. Another thing that we missed here was, we did not take into consideration whether the sale made was in year 2022 or not. For that, let's add an additional where clause, and where we'll say extract, because I want to know that the year from, I guess, transaction date. Yes, so the year part of transaction date is 2022 or not. So I will say that cast it as an integer first, and then check if it is equal to 2022 or not. Let's run this query and see whether the results have changed or not. I think it changed somewhere, I'm not sure though. But nevertheless, now we know that our scope is limited to the year 2022. The next thing we need to do is to rank it in such a way that only 2 of them are present at the end. For that, let's take this query as our starting point, a reference, and then we'll start with when we come to the from clause, we will use the table which we have just generated, which is an accumulated table which has the total spent for the each category and product as the from table. And we'll be using this as the table we fetch our results from. Whenever we use a subquery or a user generated table, always make sure that you have used an alias to refer to that table, otherwise SQL gets confused and throws an error. So I will say rank total spend table. aggregated spend would be my alias for this table. Now that we have the table ready and we know what to select, the only thing which is left is how we should rank it. So we'll create the rank. And how do we want to rank it is we want to rank it by category. So we will say partition by category, and let's take it to the next. Yes. So rank over, and then we will do partition by category. The next thing, now we want the rank in for the highest orders. So we need to order by, and we'll order by the total spend. We don't want it to be ascending, since if we leave it this way, by default it will order it in an ascending fashion. We want the highest grossing ones, which means that we want the highest numbers. So we will be ordering it in a descending fashion. So we'll create a rank over partition by category based on total spend in a descending fashion, and we will give it an alias as, say, ranking. Okay, or rank number, ranking, whatever you want to. So now each of the category and product would get a ranking on the basis of what their total spend was. The next thing which we would need to do is just a where clause, where the ranking needs to be less than or equal to 2. Since we only want the top 2 products, so we only want the numbers which have been ranked, number 1 and 2. Let's see if this works. Syntax error, we want this, we don't want it. Column ranking doesn't exist. All identifiers including column names. Oh, I don't know why it threw an error here, but we'll get through this. I think probably because I'm not using star here, not sure. Oh, see, after all this, what's wrong I did was, and it took me so much time, is that I wrote the spelling wrong. Is it? Did I write the spelling wrong? I don't think I did. Ranking does not exist. I think it needs a star to specify that I need everything from the table and a new rank. To solve this, let's put everything inside a from clause, and then we'll use the where clause after that. So select category, product, and total spend. I hope this works. Yes, it does. Okay, so what went wrong was, I'm really sorry. Yes. So since we just created the column here using our window function rank, it was not letting me put an where clause on it as is. To solve that, what I did was this whole thing, I used it as a subquery and used it under the from clause again, selected my desired category, product, total spend which I wanted from that, and then used the ranking, the newly created ranking column which we had just created, as a way to filter the ranking and limit it to just the first two values. So that is where we went wrong, and hiccups like these happen often. So yes, Kayla, this site is free to practice on. And Cristiano, the 7 actually, so oftentimes what the example output is, those kinds of inputs are just used as a dummy because they are limited, there's limited space there and they cannot show you all 100 rows there. So they cut off certain parts of it and just show you on the basis of 5 or 6 rows. However, when actually running the SQL query, there are a lot of other use cases available as well. So the 7 came from there, and don't compare your query answer to the example output. Compare it with the output given by the sheet on that particular use case. And yeah, hiccups like these happen often. So don't let yourselves down and don't feel down because it happens. It happens. It's a programming language, and we oftentimes as humans do errors and forget it. So yeah. And that's why always run your code before submitting it. If there are any errors, any syntax issues, any identifier problems, it will tell you right away and you won't end up with, because some tests or some competitions rank your score per submission. So your score might go down if you blindly submit it again and again. So run it locally, I mean on the before submission, this run code option, do that first. What we did here was we first started with our base query here, which was a very simple query where we just aggregated the total spend for each category and each product. We grouped them, we aggregated the sum, and since we wanted just for the year 2022, we added a condition where we used extract to extract the year part from the transaction date and compared it with the year 2022. After getting the total spend for the year 2022 per product, we then went ahead and created a table along with these metrics. It also added an entire new column which was ranking. Ranking was created using the window function rank. What it did was it first asked for any partition, that is categorizing it. We used our partition category, and then we wanted since for each category we wanted it to rank the products inside each category by their total spend. So we said order by total spend, and since we wanted the highest ones, so we did in a descending fashion. Once the ranking table was created, we then aggregated all of that together and took what we wanted finally the output to be from it, and then put a filtering condition, that is the ranking needs to be within 2, so that is either 1 or 2. It could be 0, but the rank by default starts from 1. So all of the products which were ranked as 1 or 2 within a category were only selected. Is this clear? So yeah, if this is clear, let's go ahead and start our third question for the day. Let me know if it is all solved from your side, please. Even wants to know if you want to get any database to use it in normal Excel. So isn't it like the database, if you're using Excel, the database is Excel, right? SQL is used when the database is stored within a relational database management system operated through SQL. So SQL is used to operate on that RDBMS. However, when you are specifically using Excel, the database is present within Excel and then you use the GUI features or the VBA codes to manipulate it. So I don't know if there's any way to get data from Excel. Or do you want to get data to SQL from Excel? That's a whole different thing. For that, you'd have to install an SQL server in your local computer and then import the files. Okay, then let's head on to the third question if everyone's ready. I feel everyone is. So, okay. The third question is from very well-known company again. We are only using the big gems today. So we have Uber for the next question. And the question here is, it'll again be using things from our previous solution. So keep an eye out for that. So Uber wants us to take into consideration the transactions made by users and then write a query to obtain the third transaction of every user. So it doesn't want us to rank it by something, but just the third transaction in number. What was the third transaction that each user made is what Uber wants from us. So I guess now we know how the drill is. We'll be getting the user ID and we want what else do we have? Okay, we just have user ID, spend and transaction date. That's all there is, and we only have one table, so no joins. User ID, spend, so let's have spend because at the end it wants us to output the third transaction, which would be the value of the spend. And next it also wants the transaction date, so I think we are basically just including everything. Now the trick here is that alongside the transaction date, it just doesn't want all of it, but it wants it to be the third one. So what we'll do is, we'll again go to our old friend rank and rank over. The categorization here would be, if you can guess it would be by user ID, because we want it for each user. Like in previous we wanted it for each category, so we did that. Here we want it for each user, and the only way to identify a user is the user ID, so we'll be partitioning by user ID. Next we want is order. So since it says particularly third, so third I am assuming is chronologically third, so we'll order by the transaction date, which I think also includes the time. So even though the user made 3 transactions in the same time, it will still order it accordingly first to last. And since we want the first third, so we would leave it by default the ascending fashion, and we'll say as rank or transaction number. And the lessons which we have gotten from our previous time solving this is that we have to enclose this again into a from clause and then select what we want from it. Let's first run it and see what it gives us. So now we see that for each user, it has given us all of its transactions and then ordered it as 123, 123, 123. So the earliest transaction, see if this transaction was made on 1st August. So it, or if you consider the American international system, we'll get 8th January. So yeah, it is 8th January. Okay. So 8th January was the first time user 111 made the transaction. Then 10th January was the second time, and 5th February was the third time. So now we know that it is ranking it properly for each transaction. Now all that there's left is to include this in a from clause. Again, what I have said is whenever using a from clause, always I'm giving it a subquery for fetching the database, always give it an alias. So I'll say transaction ranking, and what I want to select from it is all of this. Except for the ranking, I want all of it. So I'll say select user ID, spend, and transaction date from the table that we have just created. And the condition which we want is, since Uber wants only the third transaction, we'll say we want the transaction number to be equal to 3. Let's see if it does anything or not. Again, I want to call on, yeah, Cristiano. So you see how here in the example output there was only one user ID. However, the output when we ran it, it had 3 of them. So that's what we need to take away from this, is that the example input and output are always clipped and shortened just for the visual purposes to give you an idea, and they're not usually the exact test case which you get to run the query on. Let's submit it and see if it works. It does. Okay. So my query has been accepted. Let me know if yours did as well. Everyone's query got accepted? I hope it did. If it didn't, you can add your query or your error to the chat box, and I think they're all helpful here and kind enough to help you out. So if you have any doubts or your query is not getting accepted, submitted, throwing some error, please add it to the chat. Okay, then we only have 5 questions. 2 of them are left, and we are way behind schedule since we only have 17 minutes left. Positive vibes. I am sorry about not using Hindi, but since we have people from all countries here, I thought it'd be better using the international language. I'm sorry about that. Let's go ahead with the fourth question. Fourth question is again from LinkedIn. The question here is, if we are given a table of candidates and their skills and given a task that we want to find the candidates which are best suited for open data science job. I feel all of us here come into that category. We want to find candidates which are proficient in Python, Tableau and PostgreSQL, which we are currently working on. So we want to write an SQL query to list candidates which possess all of these skills, that is Python, Tableau and PostgreSQL. I talk about these skills a lot on my Twitter, by the way. If you see, every third or fourth tweet would be me ranting about how these skills and just these skills are very important and people should not be running after multiple hundreds of tools and getting their basics right with these minimal skills, which are very, very essential and make up for like 95% of any data job. So now, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Let's go ahead. We need to write an SQL query to list the candidates who possess all of these skills. Okay. So we need to sort the output by candidate ID in ascending order. Okay then. So all we want for our output is the candidate ID. The input is a single table with candidate ID and skill. So the candidate ID, I guess, gets repeated over and over again with all of the skills that a candidate possesses. So from candidates, what we want is the candidate ID. And another thing which was specified was that we need to order it by candidate ID, which is the first appearing column in the result. So we'll just use 1. This is a new thing. It was not there when I first started SQL, but it has been added recently and it's very convenient, especially when you have multiple columns and long column names. So select candidate ID from candidates and we need to order it in a descending fashion because that's how it is by default. The trick part here is that we need all of the candidates which have all of these 3 skills, which is Python, Tableau and Postgre. So what should we do is we will first, now that we know that there's multiple candidate IDs, so we'll group by the candidate ID. So it will create one group and then there'll be a corpus of skills present, a group of skills present under the name of each candidate. So now I want to see whether I want to limit the skills when doing the bundling based on candidate. I want to limit the skill to these 3 options available here, which is Python, Tableau and Postgres. So I will give it a list of values and I'll say I only want these values which are either Python or Tableau. So what in operator does is it takes a list of values and it keeps the column or this condition evaluates to true if the value inside that column for that particular row is one of these or not. So I want all of these. So I'll be saying that now I have filtered out all of the unnecessary skills. I mean, they're not unnecessary in general in real life, but they are unnecessary with respect to our question. So by putting this condition, what the resultant would be now after grouping would be each candidate ID, and only if it possesses any skills amongst these, just those skills. All of the other skills like R, Power BI, SQL Server would be removed. Now since it says that the candidate needs to be proficient in all of these skills, I'll say that the count here should be equal to 3. So like all 3 skills. So each bundle of skills which we have created for each candidate should have all 3 of these, is what I'm trying to translate through this query. Let's see if it runs or not. It does. So having is used to add conditions, just like where is used to add conditions to each row. Having is used to add conditions to each group. So let's see if it works or not. It did. It did. So let me know if this was clear and if you were able to follow along. Okay, so is everyone done till this 4th question? I'm glad. Also, just let me know if the pace is fine and everything is getting cleared or not, because I wouldn't want you to spend your weekend on something which was not valuable to you. The next and the final question for this session is by the company Adobe, a very great company to work in. Now what Adobe wants from us is, for every customer that bought Photoshop, okay, return a list of their customer ID. So it wants customer ID and how much they spent in total for other Adobe products excluding Photoshop. Okay. So there's, I guess, 2 parts to this. First is we want to fetch all of the customers who have firstly bought Photoshop, and then for those customers we want to see how much they have spent in other Adobe products which are not Photoshop. So for that, we'd first have to start with getting to know which users first of all even purchased Photoshop. So we'll say select user ID from Adobe transactions. What are the specifications here? Just customer ID, product and revenue. So we'll say where product equal to Photoshop. So this will filter out our table and leave us with the transactions made just for the product Photoshop. So we'll be able to get the user ID of all of those users which have purchased the product Photoshop. Once we run it, it says user ID doesn't exist. Oh, because it is customer ID. Sorry about that. Okay, so now it gives us a list. Here's only 2 customer ID. So it returns a list of all of the customers which have purchased Photoshop. After this, what we want is, we will use this list to help us get the customer ID and the total revenue, as it says total revenue for other. So we'll have to do a sum of revenue as revenue, because the output here demands for the name revenue. So we'll say sum revenue as revenue from Adobe transactions again. The trick here now is that we don't want it for all of the products. We only want it for the customers which have already purchased the product Photoshop. So we'll say where customer ID So now that we know that this particular query that we wrote returns the customers which have already purchased Photoshop. So we'll say the customer ID is present in this list or not. That is what it will check. And in case that is present, we will group it together by the customer ID and find out the total revenue which they have spent. The next thing here is they want all of the other Adobe products excluding Photoshop. So we would have to add one more condition here, that the product, while calculating, not for the internal query, but for the external query, when we are calculating the sum of revenue, aggregating all of the revenue together and calculating the total sum, we don't want it to include the revenue generated by the product Photoshop. So we'll say that we don't want the product Photoshop here. So product not equal to Photoshop when calculating the sum of revenue. And is a logical operator, and it is used to concatenate two conditions together. And what it does is the resultant value of both of the conditions would be true only and only if both of the conditions are true then. So and is used to concatenate in such a way that both of the conditions evaluate to true, then only the total query as a whole would evaluate to true. So it will check if the customer ID is first amongst the customers who have purchased Photoshop, and then while calculating the sum of revenue, it will make sure that the revenue of Photoshop is not getting included. So we'll exclude Photoshop. Let's see if this works. It does. So that's about this. Let me know if this query was understood or not, or if you have any doubts. Thanks, Mino. And all of you here, if you want more such SQL tips and tips on becoming a data analyst in general, resources, questions like these, make sure to connect with me on Twitter because I'm very active there and I share a lot of content specifically on Twitter. So yeah, I think we are right on schedule and we are 3 minutes before the scheduled time, so I think we're done. If anyone has any questions, anything else you would want me to explain, or out of this if you want me to explain anything more, please put it in the chat box and I'll help you with it. For the people who joined late, I'll be making this recording available and you can access it later. If not, I will end this stream now. Thank you all for joining and being a part of it. This was actually my first YouTube stream. I just created an account yesterday. I'll be sharing a lot of content here in the coming days, so make sure to subscribe and connect with me on Twitter. So I hope your weekend was productive and you felt good doing all of these SQL exercises. Let's see you all next week. Chica Bella, there's no data set actually. I have included the links for the questions in the chat, and it is actually hosted on a platform of SQL practice platform called Data Lemur. and that's where all of the database is hosted internally, and you just have to run the SQL query and get the results. So there's no need for an external database. Actually, I don't have a dataset also. So everything is present on the site. My aim for conducting this session was actually to just make ourselves familiar with such sites which are used for screening by big companies during interviews. So that's what. And most which queries I used, actually it depends on what I am currently working on. So some days it will just be fetching a lot of data from the database. Sometimes it could be getting analytics out of the database. So it would be creating aggregate functions, getting new parameters, pivoting the table in an acceptable format. Sometimes it is just cleaning the database in general because the database has been scraped out of somewhere. So it depends on really what the work I do. There's no list of SQL queries which I use on a daily basis, but things like these, the window functions, the aggregate functions, are very, very commonly used. So make sure you are clear on that. And what Chicabella wants me to increase the screen resolution. I will work on that on my next live. Thank you so much. Even I wanted to do that. So thanks for the feedback. Latif, you want me to explain? Okay. So why it does not calculate all the revenue regardless of whether it is equal to Photoshop or not is because when we are getting this, we are just getting the select customer ID. So the first part of the condition checks whether the customer ID is amongst this or not. That is people buying Photoshop. And then the next condition is concatenated through the logical operator and. You can learn about it. What it does is it takes two conditions together and the overall output of both of the conditions would equate to true only when both of the conditions are true. Otherwise, if one is true and the other one is false, it will evaluate to false. If the first one is false and the second one is true, then also it will evaluate to false. Only and only when both of these conditions evaluate to true, then only the resultant where clause would evaluate to true and that row would be selected. So first we'll see if the customer ID is in the Photoshop or not, and then we'll remove all of the rows which have the product Photoshop. So while calculating the aggregate sum, those rows won't be considered. I hope this answers your question. If it doesn't, please feel free to ask me again. Thank you all for joining. It was really fun interacting with you. I hope this was as helpful for you as it was for me. And I had a great time. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining. Bye.